Bonjour and welcome to another virtual adventure with Véro. We are in the Loire Valley today in the city of Anjou. Anjou is quite popular and rightfully so. Between its fortress that you see behind me, its cathedral, lovely streets lined with beautiful buildings spanning centuries, parks and gardens, Anjou deserves all the praise it's been getting. There is, however, a neighborhood across the river Maine from the city. I'm standing there right now. This neighborhood is well known by locals, but not so much by visitors. It is called La Doutre, and I think I will take you off the beaten path today on a new stroll. Would you like to join me? Come along. Our story starts right next to the oldest bridge in Anjou, Le Pont de Verdun. It's gone through a lot. It was rebuilt in the 19th century, destroyed by floods, destroyed by the Germans during the war, but it still stands. Anjou has 9 bridges, which is a lot, really, for a medium-sized city. But for a long time, this bridge was the only way to connect Brittany, Western France, to the rest of the country, including Paris. And Anjou has always been, for that reason, a very strategic location that powerful men and some women have fought over. The Château, 13th century fortress, still stands tall and proud, though right now it's undergoing massive restoration. And the cathedral, Saint Maurice, on the other side of the town. But today we are headed to La Doutre, a neighborhood that grew from the 11th century on. So that's roughly 1,000 years after the first people who settled down in Anjou. The Romans built a city on the other side, across from us. La Doutre grew around an abbey that was erected in the 11th century. We're going to walk past it, or what's left of it. And century after century, it grew into a lively community. By the river, typically, you would have what we would call working classes. There was a canal that was built at some point in time where tanneries could be found. And so the dwellings, the housing along the river were somehow more modest than what you would see up on the hill, because yes, there is a hill up there. It's a little bit more hilly than it seems right now. So La Doutre grew through the centuries, through the Middle Ages. And it keeps, I think, an identity of its own. It's a really interesting neighborhood. You need to explore, walk around, take those little streets to be reminded of the people who used to live here through the Middle Ages and later through the Renaissance. And there are some architectural wonders in this neighborhood. It doesn't seem to be very crowded. When I've been here in Anjou, I haven't seen too many people around here. The city has a lot of cars. There are boulevards going all around it, or there used to be old walls, and back in the 13th century, and I guess those boulevards have been erected right where some of the old walls used to be. So don't be surprised if you see some cars, quite a few cars in fact, at rush hour. It's now the middle of the afternoon, and I was hoping it'd be a little bit more quiet. We are going along the rue Repos. Repos was an army general who died a hero. He wasn't originally from Anjou, but he married someone from these parts. And he died a hero during the Revolutionary Wars. So the bridge we just saw, Le Pont de Verdun, it's actually not a reference to World War I and the famous battle in World War I, but another battle between France and Prussia during the, or after, I should say, the French Revolution. So we are here in one of the main streets of this neighborhood, La Doutre, which, as a visitor, when you take a look at it, is a mix of old buildings dating back to the Middle Ages and later, but also a mix of, you do see signs of gentrification. We're getting closer to the heart of that square, La Place de la Laiterie. a historic place in these parts. Here is the original, what's left of the original abbey that was created here, l'Abbaye de Roncereau, in the 11th century. This is actually a massive complex behind these walls. This was the church of the abbey. Right now it is a school, and it's quite spread out on the other side. But what's really interesting is the fact that they had to add another church when the neighborhood really grew. And this is the church that was added just a century later in the 12th century, Église de la Trinité. It was heavily, I would say, updated in the 19th century, but it's quite unusual to see two churches really right next to each other, connecting even right above the crypt where the original church, the one belonging to the abbey, was. The architecture of the Church of the Trinité, Église de la Trinité, is interesting. This renowned style, Gothic style, known as the Gothique Angevin Plantagenet, so from the Anjou. It's a very elegant style. Typically, the facades of the churches and cathedrals built in this area are quite striking. Inside as well, there is an appearance of elevation. The vaults are quite different from the vaults you would find in Gothic cathedrals in the Ile-de-France, for example. So when you come to the heart of La Doutre, you reach this little square, which looks very French, doesn't it? There is a boulangerie, there is a tabac where you can buy all sorts of things, including your cigarettes. You have a couple of tall platanes, plane trees. So your little village square, essentially. But what's interesting is that La Doutre was built from the river where we were standing earlier, all the way down there. And this is a very busy boulevard that was added much later in the 1960s, but originally this street would really create a fork. One fork would take you to Rennes, which is today the city of Rennes, the capital of Brittany, and if you kept going all the way to Normandy, and another street or way would take you to Brittany, which is Nantes. Nantes was part of Brittany at the time. So it was a really important communication road. And it's quite busy today still, as you can see. Here's a nice view of the Église de la Trinité I just mentioned, the one that was rebuilt in the 19th century, but with some original elements from the 12th as well. If you like architecture, especially medieval or Renaissance architecture, La Doutre is a great place to visit. You can see that as we make our way to La Place de la Laiterie, we have quite a nice lineup of old homes, most of them dating back to the 15th century and later. You can see the early ones, 15th century medieval ones, because they are corbelled homes. See the projection, the facades are not entirely flat. And then you see others that were built later, and so they don't have this architectural feature. The most famous one, and one of the oldest on the street, is this one, which belonged to a pharmacist. His name was Plisson. You can see the intricate facade. He was a very powerful man. He was wealthy, at least. Today it's a wine shop, but this is how homes would have been in the Middle Ages, with people living in the upstairs floors and then shops downstairs. So it's retained that. And some of them are in better shape than others, of course. Now this house that belonged to Monsieur Plisson actually has a little secret, and it hides right behind this panel on the left. So I'm going to cross the street and show it to you. Here we are standing outside the former home of this pharmacist named Monsieur Plisson, built in 1582. And there is a wood panel here, and you can actually open this wood panel. And it shows a really neat architectural detail dating back to the 16th century, a caryatid. A nice little secret to uncover. Interesting that right next to the pharmacist's old home, there is now an actual pharmacy. A couple more examples of old homes here, especially a very pretty one at the corner, the street corner, where you can see half the facade is made of stone. Shale is one of them. And then the top floors are more in the medieval style with wood. Really interesting structure. In our little square here, Place de la Laiterie, at the intersection, the fork of two roads that held major importance to connect with Nantes or Rennes, the two cities in Brittany at the time. In most towns, working classes tend to settle down in the lower parts of town that are easily accessible and less desirable. In La Doutre, the same thing happened. Those who had more money over the centuries went up. And you can see that I am climbing right now. Religious congregations settled down in the 17th century, and through the 17th, 18th century, those with money built incredible private mansions, hôtels particuliers. There's one in front of us. Very hard to date them exactly, because a lot of the original structures might date back to the 16th century, then the 17th with work added later on. But they are everywhere on those streets. There was a time when La Doutre was not a desirable neighborhood in Angers. In fact, it had a pretty bad reputation, sections of it. And in the 1960s, you've heard the story before as we took tours in parts of Paris, like Le Marais, for example, or in Tours, where I'm based. Through the 1960s, a lot of the nicer neighborhoods had been run down. They were run down, the buildings had been neglected, and it took a lot of effort from local associations to restore the buildings to their old glory. And in the heart of the very peaceful neighborhood, at the top of La Doutre, we have reached a lovely park. And this square is known as Place de la Paix, square dedicated to peace. Hard to believe it was once a cemetery for poor people. We are next to the former Hôpital Saint-Jean, St. John's Hospital, where I will take you a little later, and this was the cemetery attached to the hospital. Today it's a peaceful park, lined with beautiful homes. Let's take a look at a couple more, and then we will head back down towards the river to Hôpital Saint-Jean, that has been turned today into a magnificent museum. I've really enjoyed visiting. Another hôtel particulier, probably restored for several years. And that took considerable resources, as you can imagine. An old cafe that is now closed, named after the street, Café de l'Homo. Don't you love this facade? So when the old cemetery became a park, a nice peaceful square dedicated to peace in the 18th century, the old homes remained. They have been incredibly restored. Some of these facades are quite majestic. The use of the shale and other stones connected to slate in brownish or grayish tones is quite distinctive. Look at the size of that door. Wouldn't we like to have the digicode to push that door? All right. Well, I've tried to show you my favorite sections of La Doutre. There are a lot more, and you really need to come here and explore all these streets. And don't forget to look up, because you would miss a lot of facades if you did. And we are now on our way to the bottom of the hill, going back towards the river. And I will take you to the former hospital, St. John Hospital, that for 800 years was a hospital in these parts, and is now a really neat museum. The best museum on this side of the Doutre, according to me, is this museum of the Contemporary Tapestry. It is also a museum dedicated to a massive and impressive piece of work by Jean Lurçat. Like always, the setting steals the show. We are entering the grounds of a hospital for the poor, created in the 12th century by Henry II Plantagenet, King of England. Now, Henry, as you probably know, wasn't always a good guy. He murdered quite a few people, in particular the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket. And to atone for some of his sins, in the second part or later years of his life, he tended to finance churches, hospitals. And this is one of the places that he commissioned. Here's a tribute, a testament to the friendship between the Anjou region and England that was erected a few years back on a piece of slate, which is perfect for this area. The two coats of arms, you have on the right-hand side Henry II Plantagenet, who was King of England and lived in the 12th century. He commissioned this incredible place. His father, Geoffroy Plantagenet, was a Count of Anjou, and this is the connection between the Plantagenet dynasty and this part of what we call today France. This hospital welcomed the poor, and I will take you inside. For 800 years, it remained a hospital, until in the mid-19th century, Angers built a university hospital, CHU, not too far from here. And at that point in time, the hospital closed down, and it became a bit of an archaeological museum dedicated to the antiquity, which is why you have some old stones and relics of sorts in the park today. So you have both a museum dedicated to contemporary tapestry, like I said, with sometimes exhibits, like right now, they have a good one going on. But my favorite part is in this building. And this building was essentially the hospital ward. And there is a massive tapestry made by Jean Lurçat. Jean Lurçat, who was a contemporary artist in the 20th century, went across the river to the Château d'Angers and saw the incredible tapestry there and decided to create a response to it. He saw it in the 1930s, and by the 1960s he had created his own, which is what's on exhibit. What's exhibited, inside this museum. Of course, it's the take of a man who lived in the 20th century on the creation of the world, good versus evil, a man who had experienced 2 world wars, so some parts of it are rather dark, and other parts are much more cheerful or uplifting. So it is Jean Lurçat's response to the tapestry of the apocalypse that's exhibited at the Château d'Angers, and it is a must-see here in La Doutre when you come on this side of the river. Let's go in, shall we? Let's enter the hospital the way we would have entered it at the time, through the cloister. Another building right behind me is Le Grenier, the granary. They would have stored wine in the basement and supplies for the sick upstairs. It's been beautifully restored, So the sick and the poor would arrive here, and the cloister would be somewhat of a waiting room, maybe a triage place as well, before they could move on, if they were admitted, move on into the hospital, the building you see right behind it. Two of these sides in the cloister date back to the 12th century, when the hospital was open. Look at this fireplace. Here's the entrance into the hospital. And right here behind this door is a chapel, where those who were healthy enough could walk to and pray. See some pigmentation left on the walls. Must have been colorful here. And so if you were admitted, you would go into the hospital this way. Well, all good things have an end. Thank you for following me today as I strolled around La Doutre, this wonderful neighborhood in Angers. All my virtual tours are tip supported. I will put the information for my virtual tip jar in the video notes. All tips gratefully accepted, of course. Thank you in advance. If you'd really like to support this project of mine and encourage me to do more of those tours, look me up on Patreon, patreon.com/francewithvero. You'll be helping me, you'll be helping yourself too with a lot of exclusive content, live events, and even meetups in Paris coming up this fall. À bientôt les amis.